The gallery hall at Ashford Academy smelled like warm white wine. Colt Mercer stood near the far end, looking at his daughter's painting a crayon sun, yellow and orange, pressed hard into paper with joy. Wren stood beside him, fingers bunched in her dress. Then a woman's voice cut across the room. "Who on earth let that one in? It looks like something from a kindergarten craft table." Wren heard every word. Her fingers tightened. Colt crouched to her level and said something close to her ear. 3 seconds. Wren smiled, the kind that starts in the eyes. Colt Mercer had not always been a man who fixed other people's wiring. For 11 years he had worked as a senior electrical systems engineer at a consulting firm in downtown Nashville, designing load distribution frameworks for commercial construction projects across the Southeast. He had liked the work. It required precision and patience, and the particular satisfaction of making something invisible function correctly. He had been good at it. Then, in the winter of 2022, his wife Dana was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the age of 35, and by the following spring she was gone, and Wren was 6 years old, and Colt had handed in his notice because the consulting firm required 60 hours a week, and he had a daughter who needed picking up at 3:15 every afternoon without exception. He went independent, residential and light commercial electrical work, scheduled around school hours. He took evening calls 3 nights a week to cover the difference. The income dropped by roughly 70%. He did not complain about this because it was not a hardship, it was arithmetic. You added up what mattered and organized your life accordingly. Dana had wanted Wren at Ashford Academy, not for prestige, but because the school ran a dedicated fine arts program, one of only 2 in the district that began formal drawing instruction in the 2nd grade. Dana had been a painter herself, watercolors on quiet Saturday mornings at the kitchen table. She had spent the year of Wren's first birthday pointing at the sky and naming the colors in it, not just blue, but the bruised purple blue before a storm, the pale, thin blue that had no warmth in it at all. She had left behind 23 finished canvases and a daughter who drew on every surface available. Wren had tested for the Academy's Merit Scholarship the previous spring and received one of 7 awarded that year, a partial scholarship covering 60% of tuition. Colt paid the remainder in monthly installments, each one the precise size of 1 extra evening's work. He did not consider this a sacrifice. It was the point. The gallery was thinning out when a woman approached from his left, somewhere in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of measured self-possession that comes from years in rooms where you need to be taken seriously. She wore a gray blazer and moved with clear intention. "I was standing about 15 feet away," she said. "I heard all of it." Colt looked at her. "Sloan Whitfield. My son Miles is in the same class as your daughter." She said it loud enough on purpose. Colt said, "Yeah, I know." He looked back at the painting. "My daughter needed to see that her work had value. That was more important than anything I might have said to Diane Ashby." Miles appeared beside Sloan, then 9 years old. Sandy hair, his boredom dissolving the moment Wren materialized, and asked if he'd seen the snake painting in the 3rd grade section. The 2 children disappeared down the corridor together. Sloan watched them go. "I'm at Whitfield Creative, on Demonbrone. I also do this alone." She said the last sentence without asking for anything. "So does Wren," Colt said. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity, but recognition. They talked another 10 minutes and said goodnight without exchanging numbers. But Sloan drove home carrying the conversation, and she was still turning it over when she pulled into her driveway. She sat in the car for a few minutes after she cut the engine. Miles was already asleep. She thought about a man who had crouched down in the middle of a gallery full of people and made sure his daughter knew that her work was real before he worried about anything else. She thought about the LinkedIn piece, the precision of it, the way it moved through a complex system without losing the human logic underneath. Most technically skilled people she had worked with thought in components. The person who wrote that piece had thought in systems. The parking lot behind Ashford Academy was lit by a single row of overhead lights that turned everything a flat amber. Most parents had already gone. Colt was loading Wren's backpack into the passenger seat of his truck when he heard footsteps on the
Вот что
asphalt.
значит,
Sloane stopped a few feet away
чуть
with the slightly formal posture of someone who had made a decision and was following through with it. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and it's not small talk."
Так,
Colt
давай.
straightened and closed the truck door. "How did you know what to say to her?"
Умылся, да,
In the
конечно,
moment,
это
you didn't
сделал
hesitate.
всё.
You knew exactly what Ren needed to hear.
Так, короче, надо
He was
еще
quiet for a
будет.
second. "Ren doesn't need to see me
Я
angry,"
не
he
знаю,
said.
если
"She needs
часов
to
в
know
10
that
мы
what she
где-то
made is
будем
real.
поблизости,
That a woman with a
надо
wine
будет
glass
заехать
doesn't get to
в
decide
этот,
what real
на
is."
Озон Pro
Sloane was
забрать.
still. Ren had climbed into the truck and was pressing her nose against the window at Miles, who made a face back at her. Neither adult looked at them. "I should tell you something,"
4 дня, я
Sloane
только
said.
вчера тебе
"About 8
или
months ago,
позавчера
we were pitching a
сказал.
technology client on a smart building energy efficiency
4
campaign.
тоже
My
не
research director found an
писала.
analysis posted anonymously on LinkedIn, a detailed breakdown of commercial load distribution, common inefficiencies in mid-scale construction, retrofit cost modeling, thoroughly
Бля,
technical.
с этого,
We
с
used it in the pitch
мобильного
and
это
won the account."
нельзя, да, вроде
She
сделать.
looked at him directly. "I recognized the way you organized your thoughts tonight. In sequence, without any visible effort. I'd read that piece 3 times building the pitch deck." Colt said nothing for a moment. A car moved slowly through the lot behind them. "I don't know why you stopped writing under your name," she said. "But whoever wrote that piece understood the work completely." "I was busy," he said. It was not entirely true. After Dana died, he had lost the appetite for being seen for the particular exposure of putting his name on something and sending it out into a world that was continuing without her. Sloane did not push on it. "Miles was quiet at school," she said. "He was shy before the divorce, and he's gotten quieter since." Ren talked to him first about a month into the year. He came home and described it in enough detail that I knew it had mattered to him more than he was letting on. "She does that," Colt said. "She doesn't understand why people don't just talk to each other. Neither does Miles. He just doesn't know how yet." The lot had gone quiet around them. In the truck, Ren had apparently decided the face-making game was over and was reading something from her backpack. "She drew a sun," Sloane said, looking at the truck window. "Most 8-year-olds draw what they've been taught to draw." "She drew what she felt. Her mother used to name the colors in the sky," Colt said. Ren learned the sun early. They stood another moment in the amber light. Then Sloane said goodnight
Короче, Илюху обед
and walked to her
напомнил.
car. Colt drove home with Ren asleep against the window before they reached the end
Ну,
of the
обед
block.
будем
He did not
домой
know that
заезжать.
Sloane had recognized his name in the first 3 seconds of their
Напомнил
introduction
обед.
and said nothing had placed him from an analysis she'd read 3 times while
Давно
building a
говорил,
pitch,
но это я
and had spent the
думал.
rest of the evening deciding whether to cross that parking lot at all. He did not know she had been deciding for most of the night.
Чё
He
тебе
drove
щас
home and carried Ren
рассказывать?
inside from the truck. She had been asleep for 3 blocks and did not stir and laid her in
Что
bed
за
with her shoes still
топор?
on because removing them always woke her, and then he stood in the kitchen in the dark for a few minutes, thinking about how seldom a Friday evening produced anything worth thinking about afterward, and how this one had. The email arrived on a Tuesday, just after 7 in the morning. Colt had already dropped Ren at school and was sitting in his truck in a client's driveway when the CC notification came through from Dr. Lena Voss, principal of Ashford Academy. The original email was from Diane Ashby, addressed to the full administrative faculty, and it began with 3 paragraphs about the school's commitment to excellence before arriving at its purpose. A formal request that the board review the criteria used to award fine arts scholarships, with particular attention to whether current recipients were, in her words, meeting the standard of artistic development consistent with Ashford's community expectations. She did not name Ren. She did not need to. There was only one scholarship recipient in the 3rd grade fine arts program. Colt read the email twice. He placed his phone face down on the seat. He looked up at the ordinary Tuesday morning light coming through the client's window and thought about a 6-year-old girl standing at a graveside, holding a bunch of yellow flowers, because she had heard somewhere that yellow was a happy color, and she had wanted her mother's funeral to have something happy in it. He picked up his phone and typed 4 words to Dr. Voss, "I will be there." He set the phone down and went inside to work. He was pulling old aluminum wiring from a wall cavity
Такой
that
тоже
afternoon
можно
when his
было
phone
бы
rang
как
with an
пельчик
unfamiliar number.
топорчик бахнуть.
He answered on the fourth ring. "This is
Что
Sloan Whitfield,"
впрочем-то в
the
целом.
voice said. "Doctor, Voss gave me your number.
Ща
I hope
кушать?
that's all right.
Не
It's
кушать.
fine. You got the email." "Yes." A brief pause. "What are you planning to do?"
Ща в Химки,
Colt
наверное,
set down the
поим,
wire
там
stripper and
зона
leaned against the
покажет.
wall stud. "I'm going to the meeting Wednesday. I don't have a plan beyond that yet. What do you know about Diane Ashby?"
Посмотрим.
Enough to know she didn't write that email because she has an opinion about Wren's crayon work.
Посмотрим.
Sloan was quiet a moment. "No," she said.
Блять, или
She
нет,
didn't.
там
"I know what this is
зона,
actually
не
about.
знаю,
I think I can
погоди-ка.
help. Can we meet in person? Thursday morning," he said.
То есть
"Steadfast
вообще
Coffee
не
on Belmont,
понимаю, да.
8 o'clock. I'll be there." She said
Блять,
goodbye and
куда
hung
я
up.
нажал?
Colt went back to pulling wire from the wall and thought about what kind of person calls a near
Так, давай
stranger on a Tuesday
переедем, потом
afternoon
если
with the
чё,
particular
назад
steadiness of
вернёмся.
someone who already knows what they're going to say. He decided it was
Если
probably
вам
someone who dealt
понравится.
professionally with exactly the kind of language Diane Ashby used, who had learned to read it the way he read a wiring diagram, following the load to its source regardless of how many junction boxes it passed through first. He had been doing this kind of work for 11 years before he had gone independent, and the core habit of tracing a system back to its origin had never left him, even when the system in question had nothing to do with wire. He realized, somewhere between the wall stud and the corner he was navigating, that he was looking forward to Thursday morning in a way he hadn't looked forward to much in a while. Not with urgency, with the quiet focus of someone who has been handed a problem that is specifically theirs to solve. He finished the wall cavity and moved on to the junction box, working through the afternoon in the particular rhythm that came from doing skilled work alone. The same rhythm that had gotten him through the first year after Dana died. He was grateful for it now for a different reason. He had spent 11 years making invisible things function correctly. He was beginning to think this was the same kind of work, just applied in a different direction, and that maybe that was the point of having learned it in the first place. Steadfast Coffee was a narrow room with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu, and the kind of low ambient noise that made conversation feel private even at close tables. Colt arrived 3 minutes early. Sloan was already there, a laptop and 2 paper cups on the table. Miles and Wren installed at a corner table with colored pencils and a shared sketch pad, close enough to see, far enough not to hear. She had arranged this before he arrived. He noticed it immediately and filed it as information about how she operated. She turned the laptop toward him without preamble. Diane Ashby's ex-husband was a man named Gerald Ashby, who ran a private educational foundation called the Cornerstone Academic Fund out of Franklin, Tennessee. The fund's stated mission was supporting academic excellence in private K-12 institutions. Its actual mechanism was institutional investment, grants and infrastructure support in exchange for governance influence, specifically, the right to consult on admissions criteria and scholarship eligibility standards. Gerald has approached 3 other private schools in Tennessee in the last 4 years, Sloan said. Brentwood Preparatory Street, Marcus Academy in Chattanooga, and the Hillcrest School in Knoxville. She paused. Diane has been lobbying the Ashford board for 6 months to accept a Cornerstone partnership. She already has 2 board supporters. Colt looked at the screen, and the scholarship review email is the first deliverable, he said. The fund doesn't want to force criteria changes directly. They want a board resolution initiated by a parent. It looks organic. She nodded. He sat back. He looked at his coffee. Across the room, Miles was studying something Wren had drawn with small curator seriousness, while Wren had already moved on to the next thing, pencil moving quickly across the page. How many other families would be affected if the criteria changed? Colt said. Sloan stopped. She had prepared for a number of responses. Not that one. There are currently 11 scholarship recipients across the school, she said carefully. If the new criteria weight institutional contribution the way Cornerstone's model works at other schools, most of them lose their spots within 2 years, Colt said. That's correct, Sloan said. He was quiet for a moment, still watching the children. Then this isn't about Wren, he said. It never was. This is about 11 families, and what happens to them if a board resolution passes quietly because nobody asked the right questions. He said it the way a person states a confirmed fact. Sloan looked at him across the table and thought, he already knew it wasn't about Ren. He was asking to confirm the numbers so he could work with it precisely. She pushed the laptop closer. Here's everything I have, she said. Tell me what else you need. Across the room, Ren had set down her pencil and was explaining something to Miles using both hands, a habit she'd had since she was 3, when Dana first noticed it and quietly hoped she'd never lose it. Miles was listening with the kind of attention that comes from a child who has learned that listening is its own form of closeness. Colt watched them for a moment and then turned back to the screen. The fund's state financial filings, he said. Which database did you pull those from? Sloan told him. He made a note in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. Across the room, Miles said something that made Ren set down her pencil and look at him genuinely look. The way she looked at things when she was deciding whether they were important. Then she picked up the pencil again. Colt turned back to the screen. He had 4 evenings before Wednesday, and he already knew exactly where he was going to start. Sloan watched him write the note and said nothing. She had dealt with a great many people in her professional life who talked about problems in systemic terms, but thought about them in personal ones. Colt did it the other way around. He started the night Ren fell asleep. The house went quiet by 8:30. Ren had always been an early sleeper. The same serene self-containment that let her walk up to strangers and introduce herself without visible anxiety. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a glass of water and pulled up the Cornerstone Academic Fund's publicly filed documents. Tennessee law required foundations of its class to file annual financial disclosures with the State Department of Revenue. The filings were available in a searchable public database. He had not done this kind of research in nearly 3 years, not since the period after Dana's diagnosis, when sleep stopped coming reliably, and he had needed something precise and absorbing to do with his mind in the long hours, between midnight and 5 in the morning. The habit came back with surprising ease. It was still his, underneath everything that had changed. He cross-referenced the fund's reported disbursements against scholarship enrollment data from the 3 schools Sloan had identified. At Brentwood Preparatory, Cornerstone had entered a partnership in the fall of 2019. By spring of 2021, the school's need-based scholarship program had been restructured into a merit and endowment model that effectively required a minimum annual family contribution of $12,000. Enrollment of students from households below the county median income dropped 63% in the following academic year. Street, Marcus Academy in Chattanooga, showed a nearly identical pattern, offset by 18 months. The Hillcrest School in Knoxville was the most recent case. The restructuring had happened the previous spring, the numbers still accumulating, but the direction unmistakable. He built a document. School name, year of partnership, number of scholarship students affected at the time of the transition. The total across all 3 schools was 23. He looked at that number for a long time. 23 was not abstract. It was slightly more than half the students in Ren's grade. He thought about what it meant to be 8 years old and told that the place you had earned no longer had room for you, not because anyone had decided you didn't belong, but because a structure had been quietly adjusted and you fell below the new line. He called Sloan at 11 minutes past 11. She picked up on the second ring. He walked her through each school in order: the names, the years, the enrollment figures, the total. She was silent through all of it. Then, you built that tonight. The data was public. It just needed organizing. A pause. Diane has been on the board 3 years, Sloan said. She is very good at framing proposals in language that makes disagreement sound unreasonable. I'm not going to disagree, he said. I'm going to make the room understand what it's actually voting on. Another pause. Then Sloan said quietly, what do you need from me Wednesday? He thought about the geometry of a parent association meeting, where everyone already knew each other, and he was the one nobody expected to have prepared anything. Just be there, he said. Sometimes that's enough. He said goodnight and sat for a few minutes in the quiet kitchen with the lamp on and the refrigerator humming and the night sounds of the neighborhood moving through the walls. A car, A few streets over, the dog 2 houses down making its brief complaint at something, the specific silence of a house, with a sleeping child in it, that he had come to know so well, it had become its own kind of company. He felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was walking towards something rather than simply managing the distance from what he had lost. The distinction mattered more than he had expected it to. He closed the laptop and went to check on Ren, which was what he always did before bed, and she was on her back with one arm stretched out to the side, the way she had slept since she was an infant. The Ashford Academy Parent Association met in the school's East Conference Room on the second Wednesday of each month. On this particular Wednesday, 41 chairs had been arranged in a loose semicircle, and everyone was occupied before the meeting came to order at 7 o'clock. Word had traveled through the parent network in the preceding days imprecisely, the way it always does, with the true details obscured by speculation, but people had sensed something was happening, and they had come. Diane Ashby stood at the podium in a fitted navy blazer and presented her proposal with the smooth confidence of someone who had stood in front of rooms like this many times. She framed it as a vision for Ashford's future competitive standards, institutional partnerships, a commitment to excellence. She used the phrase eligibility criteria, modernization, and the phrase community investment alignment. She did not use the word scholarship. She did not mention Gerald Ashby or the Cornerstone Academic Fund. When she finished, the room held an attentive quiet, the kind where people wait to see which direction the current runs before committing to swim in it. Dr. Lena Voss said in a measured voice, "We'll open the floor for comments." Several parents spoke supportive, vague, the rhetorical equivalent of a polite nod. Then Colt raised his hand. He was sitting in the third row in the same flannel shirt from the gallery, because it was the shirt he owned, and it was clean. He did not stand when he spoke. He spoke from his seat, clearly, without notes, looking at no particular point in the room. He began with the founding charter. Ashford Academy's original scholarship agreement, ratified in 1994 and reaffirmed in 2011, explicitly stated that fine arts scholarship criteria could be reviewed only by a 2/3 vote of the full board of trustees, not by the parent association. He cited the article and section from memory. Several people in the room reached for their phones. Then he named Gerald Ashby and the Cornerstone Academic Fund. He described the fund's operational model. He presented the 3 schools, Brentwood Preparatory, Street, Marcus Academy, Hillcrest, by name and year of their respective partnership agreements, and the enrollment changes that followed, expressed not as percentages but as children. 12 at Brentwood, 8 at Street Marcus, 3 so far at Hillcrest. 23 children across 3 schools in 4 years who had lost their places. He said it clearly, in sequence, without editorial. Then he sat back. The silence after he finished was a different kind than the silence after Diane Ashby had finished. Dr. Lena Voss stood not to the podium, but from her chair at the side of the room, and the room gave her its full attention. "I need to disclose something to this body," she said. "6 months ago, I received a formal partnership proposal from the Cornerstone Academic Fund. I declined it without public announcement, because at the time I had no documented basis for my concerns beyond professional judgment." She paused. "I now have one." She looked across the room. "The proposal, Mrs. Ashby has presented tonight, falls under the Charter's trustee review requirement. It cannot be acted on by this association. I am going to recommend to the full Board of Trustees that it not be advanced." The procedural vote that followed failed 9-2. Diane Ashby walked to the exit without speaking. At the door, she stopped and turned, and for one moment she looked directly at Colt. Anger, recalculation, and something close to acknowledgement, all in the same expression, and then she left. Sloane leaned across the empty chair between them and touched his arm lightly, just above the elbow. "You just protected more than 20 children tonight," she said quietly. He nodded once. He was already thinking about the morning. Ren asked about it in the truck on the way to school. She was eating a piece of toast she had insisted on bringing with her, watching the traffic on Hillsborough Pike, when she said, without looking at him, "You came home really
Никого
late last
нахуй не
night. I
сбил,
had a meeting at
слава
school,"
богу.
he said. "Was it about something bad?" He kept his eyes on the road.
Ну, может,
It
и
was about something that
заберут,
needed fixing.
но не
She took a bite of
знаю.
toast
Не
and thought about
уверен,
this with the
конечно.
careful deliberateness she brought to most
Так,
things.
ладно.
"Did you fix it?"
Где у нас
"I
вот
think
это
so."
Френч
She nodded, apparently
Бейкери?
satisfied, and looked back out the window.
Что-то там.
3 blocks from school, she said, still watching the street.
Французская
"I knew you would."
пекарня.
She said it the way she stated certain things not as a compliment but as an established fact that had already been settled somewhere prior to this conversation. She climbed out at the drop-off loop, grabbed her backpack, and went through the gate without looking back, as if she simply assumed he would be there in the afternoon, and there was nothing that needed to be made of a goodbye. He pulled out of the loop and drove to the end of the block, and then he stopped, because the tears came before he had time to redirect them. Not the grief tears, not the ones that still arrived without warning in the frozen food aisle, or in the silence after he'd put Ren to bed, the ones about Dana, and the specific cruelty of how little time there had been. These were different. They occupied a different part of the chest, entirely somewhere between relief and the sense of having done a thing that was specifically his to do, not the compensatory labor of being both parents at once, which he did without complaint, but which was always, at its root, a response to an absence. This had been something chosen, something aimed at a clear target. He sat on the corner of Belmont and Wedgwood for 3 minutes. He was not sure exactly what he was crying about, and he had enough experience with grief to know that you do not always need to be sure. Sometimes the body registers something the mind is still catching up to. He wiped his face and pulled into the morning traffic and drove to his first job of the day. The morning felt different from other mornings, not lighter, but cleaner in its purpose. He had done a specific thing that mattered in a specific direction. After 2 years of doing things that mattered in no particular direction at all, the difference was considerable. His phone buzzed with a text at 9:23. It was from Sloan. "Miles says Ren drew him a picture of the sun yesterday. He put it up on his wall." Colt read it twice. He was sitting in a client's driveway in East Nashville, with the truck idling and October light coming through the windshield in a way that reminded him of mornings when Ren was 2 and used to press her palm flat against the window and glass to feel the warmth on the other side. He had not thought about that in a long time. He held the phone a moment longer than any particular purpose required. Then he set it on the seat and looked out the windshield. The driveway he was parked in belonged to a family he had never met before this job. He knew their address and their panel configuration, and nothing else about them. Most of the time that was fine, but sitting there with October light on the glass and Sloane's text still on the screen, he thought about what it meant that Ren had drawn someone a son, that she had looked at Miles and decided he was the kind of person who needed one. He picked up his toolbox, got out of the truck, and went inside. The problem at Whitfield Creative Agency was a breaker panel that kept tripping the north wing circuits under any load above 1200 watts. Sloan had texted him about it on a Friday, and he scheduled it for the following Tuesday, his lightest day. The office was on the 6th floor of a converted building on Demon Brone Street, polished concrete floors, adjustable track lighting, the curated disorder of a creative firm, comfortable enough in its own skin to leave the disorder uncorrected. A receptionist named Jamie showed him to the utility room, and Sloan appeared 10 minutes later while he had the panel open and was working through the breaker configuration. "Thank you for coming," she said from the doorway. "You gave me 5 days," he said without looking up. "That's not short notice." She looked different here than she had at the gallery or in the parking lot. Flat shoes, a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled, reading glasses pushed up on her head. More like herself, he thought, and then considered that he was working from a fairly small sample. She walked him through the rest of the floor, and in the main corridor he stopped at a large print on the wall swirling oranges and yellows, abstract and immediate, communicating feeling before it communicated anything identifiable. "Campaign?" he asked. "Energy company," Sloan said. "We were trying to express heat as a positive force rather than a warning." The client almost rejected it because there was no product visible in the image. "It works because there's no product in it," Colt said. She looked at him. "That's exactly what I told them." He stood there a moment. Ren draws what she feels, not what she sees. The technique comes after, if it comes at all. That's what makes it nearly impossible to teach, Sloan said. You can teach observation and proportion. You cannot teach someone to care about what they're looking at. They ate lunch at the small conference room table sandwiches from a deli 2 floors down. The kind of lunch that happens because it's noon and 2 people are in the same building. He told her about Dana, not as a narrative, more as facts he wanted briefly out of his own head. Dana liked yellow. She had learned the names of all the Nashville street trees because she hated not knowing what things were called. She died in March when the cherry trees on the hospital road were already starting, and Ren had picked a dandelion from the parking lot because it was the only yellow thing within reach. He did not look at his sandwich while he said this. Sloan did not say she was sorry or offer anything reflective. She listened without moving, which was exactly what he had needed without knowing it. When he finished, she said, "Miles was 4 when his father left. He asks me sometimes why some kids have a dad who picks them up and some kids don't." Colt looked at her. "What do you tell him?" "I tell him some families look different on the outside, but they're still whole on the inside." A pause. "I'm not sure I believe it yet," she said. "But I keep saying it." He left at 2:15 with the panel fixed and a note for Jamie about a secondary issue in the East Circuit box, not urgent, but worth addressing before winter. In the elevator going down, he thought about the lunch. He had not talked about Dana with anyone in a long time, not because people didn't ask, but because the asking always felt like an invitation to perform grief rather than simply have it. Sloan had not asked. She had listened and not tried to redirect it or make it more manageable. She had just received it. He thought that was probably the harder thing to do. The article appeared in the Nashville Ledger 11 days after the Parent Association meeting, 420 words on the B section's 3rd page, citing public minutes and noting that a scholarship parent had presented documented concerns about the Cornerstone Academic Fund's history at 3 Tennessee private schools. It did not name Colt. It referred to him as a scholarship parent who raised procedural objections. Diane Ashby read it that morning over coffee, alone at her kitchen counter, and spent much of the day making phone calls. She was not a woman who absorbed a public setback quietly. She had built her position on the Parent Association board through 3 years of careful social management, knowing which parents wanted to feel consulted, which ones wanted credit, which ones wanted to feel they belonged to something that could reasonably be called excellence, and she did not intend to have that position dismantled by a man in a flannel shirt who fixed residential wiring for a living. By afternoon, she had reached Kara Finch, the Ledger journalist, and offered a different angle. The unnamed parent had no formal credentials in financial or economic analysis, and the meeting's outcome had been driven primarily by the principal's disclosure, rather than by the parent's presentation. She offered this politely, framing it as a concern about journalistic accuracy rather than anything personal. The implication was nonetheless clear. Kara Finch was thorough. She spent 45 minutes cross-referencing the scholarship parent against publicly available professional records before she found the LinkedIn attribution in a Whitfield creative agency pitch document uploaded to a public industry forum 8 months earlier, removed within a week, but not before Kara's research software had archived it. The piece itself, a 700-word technical breakdown of electrical load distribution inefficiencies in commercial mid-scale construction, had over 200 shares and had drawn responses from 3 licensed engineers and a faculty member at Vanderbilt's Civil Engineering Department, who described it as one of the cleaner explanations of the retrofit cost problem he had encountered from outside academia. Diane Ashby had told Kara the man lacked credentials. The record was pointing in a specific direction. Kara called. Colt was on a job site in Sylvan Park when his phone rang. He listened to her introduction and her interview offer and her assurance that she was not trying to embarrass anyone. He said, "I'm going to decline." A brief pause. "Can I ask why?" "The story isn't about me. There are 11 kids at Ashford with scholarships, and the story is about whether those scholarships survive the next 2 years. That's what your readers should know about." Kara was quiet a moment. "Would you let me reach out to some of those families directly? That's not my call, but I think some of them would talk to you." She thanked him and hung up. He finished the job and drove home and found Ren at the kitchen table drawing a horse, her current subject of dedicated focus. That evening, Sloane texted. The ledger ran a second piece. It's better than the first. You turned down being quoted? He replied. The story needed to be about the right thing. 3 minutes passed. Then, you just turned down being famous. He looked at the phone, typed back. Ren already thinks I'm famous. That was the whole point. He set the phone face down on the kitchen table and went to see what his daughter was drawing. It was still the horse, but she had added a rider, a small figure with no particular features, just the suggestion of a person on a running horse. In the upper left corner, she had drawn a sun, yellow and round and radiating lines pressed hard into the paper, the same sun she always drew. 6 weeks passed. In December, Ashford Academy's Board of Trustees approved an amendment to the Fine Arts Scholarship Program, not reducing it, but expanding it. 4 additional scholarships would be offered beginning the following academic year, partially underwritten by a new institutional supporter. The press release named Whitfield Creative Agency. Sloane had presented the proposal to the board herself, framing it as a corporate community investment and naming no one's child and no one's specific circumstance. The board approved it in 11 minutes. On a Saturday afternoon in the second week of January, Colt and Sloane and Ren and Miles walked along the Shelby Bottoms Greenway on the east side of the Cumberland River. It was the kind of January day Nashville occasionally produces, pale sunlight giving the bare trees a clean architectural quality, cold enough to see your breath but not cold enough to stop children from running. Ren and Miles had gone ahead on the path. Miles with his hands in his pockets, Ren talking with the unself-conscious intensity she brought to all explanations. Their voices came back in fragments, something about horses, something about the difference between a lake and a river, something that made Miles laugh in the way children laugh when they do not expect to. Sloane and Colt walked behind them, somewhere between the footbridge and the bend in the river where the hackberry trees stood in a row. Their hands touched briefly, the way it happens when two people are walking close and both paying attention to the children ahead rather than to each other. Sloane did not move her hand away. Colt, after a moment, did not either. They walked like that without naming it, which felt like the right pace for something that had been accumulating since a Friday evening in October in a gallery hall that smelled like warm white wine. Ren turned back once, about 30 feet ahead, to confirm the adults were still following. She looked at them at the space between them that was no longer a space and turned back around and said something to Miles that made him glance back as well. Both children faced forward and kept walking, and neither said a word. Ren smiled briefly to herself, the quiet smile of someone whose suspicion has just been confirmed. She said something to Miles that made him smile too, and then she was talking again, and whatever she said next, Miles answered with the directness of a child who has learned to talk to this particular person without reservation, which is a thing that takes time and cannot be faked. Sloane heard it from 30 feet away and felt it the way you feel something that has been building long enough to arrive without announcement. Colt Mercer had not said anything grand that night at the gallery. He had not confronted Diane Ashby, or raised his voice, or made a scene anyone would later quote. He had knelt to his daughter's level and said, "That painting is the best one in this room, because you made it with everything you had." 30 days later, 23 children continued to have their scholarships. 6 weeks after that, 4 more children would have ones they hadn't had before. And Ren Mercer, 8 years old, a box of 64 crayons, a sun pressed hard into paper, with everything she had had been the only reason any of it was necessary. She did not know this. She was running ahead on the Shelby Bottoms path in January light, explaining something to Miles about rivers, and she would not know it for a long time, but Colt Mercer knew it. He walked along the Cumberland with Sloane Whitfield's hand in his, and the bare hackberry trees, making their clean lines against the pale sky, and he knew it the way he knew the work, not as a conclusion he had arrived at, but as a fact that had always been true, waiting for him to have the right kind of morning to recognize it.